Welcome to Trimet 101. Today we're going to be talking about Forward Together 2.0 again. But before I get into this too far, I'm starting to lose my voice apparently. And also, if you haven't seen part 1, I'm going to put a card here. I would definitely watch that first because it introduces this whole concept. So it's now time to talk about my thoughts and my adjustments that I would make to this particular concept. I'll show the map on screen here, but the first thing I'm going to talk about is not something you would see visually on the map, but it is something that you would experience as a time delay of sitting there waiting at your bus stop, and that is a frequency boost during the rush hour. Now, frequency boosts during the rush hour are not nearly as efficient as spreading it more thin. It's the reason why the Markham Hill routes don't exist anymore. Because it's not really efficient to run buses in peak direction only during the rush hour to go in one direction and then deadhead all the way back and go and do something else. A lot of the vehicle miles are spent with no passengers on the bus. And it means that you have a lot of bus operators operating all at the same time just for a few hours out of the day, rather than spreading that resource over the course of an entire day. However, on that same token, there are always going to be some part-time operators that are going to need to do school trippers and other things like that, and are very useful for having a frequency boost during the rush hour. After all, the rush hour is the busiest part of day, and so having those extra buses is needed. So these would be the routes that I would put a frequency boost on during the rush hour. However, yeah, you got line 12 on here. Line 12 is a little bit different on this Forward Together thing because the Southwest Corridor Max is built on here. The 12 doesn't go on Barber Boulevard anymore and instead goes on Beaverton-Hillsdale Highway. I'm going to talk about that shortly, but I would not do that. It does make sense, but at the same time it kind of doesn't in my head, and I will explain that shortly. So the 12 would be a little similar to this corridor. The 12 would not go to Tigard Transit Center, it would go to Burlingame. I will again discuss that shortly. I think it's time to add another card because I know I've done a video talking about this before, and I did not watch the video that I made on this or look at a list or anything. I just kind of made all of this up off the top of my head while writing this script. But these would be the routes that would have E trips during the rush hour. So for example, 14E, meaning that the bus line exists, but then during the rush hour sprinkled in between other buses would be express trips that do express things. Line 30E would not go to downtown Portland because that would be competitive with the Max Orange line, and it just doesn't really seem to benefit all that much. So it would instead go to Milwaukee. The 30E would not go on 82nd Drive at all. It would go up to 82nd Drive and then it would go on to the Milwaukee Expressway, and it just would long haul it on the Milwaukee Expressway and serve Milwaukee City Center. I've plastered some numbers up here. These numbers are going to be the bus lines that I'm going to talk about. Let me talk about something that has really bothered me about both the Forward Together 1.0 and 2.0, and it is line 45. The 45 has now become a sort of catch-all route. It takes over all of today's line 39 and then tacks on the Garden Home extension, or the Garden Home piece, and then the 53 in Beaverton. So it's like a mishmash of 3 routes. And I see a lot of weird things with it. I get what they were going for, combine routes, and so you'll save an operator because this one operator can now drive multiple routes, all just one long through running thing. That's fine. That's not the part I have a problem with. I just don't like how they did it, because line 45 doesn't go to downtown Portland anymore. So what's the deal with the 51? Why am I lumping that in with this? Well, think about it. Line 51 got a little extension further down Dosh Road and over to Ida B. Wells High School. Then it just kind of goes around Ida B. Wells High School and just abruptly ends in Burlingame. It just ends. And then it turns around and just goes back. So if that route can just end there, then here's what we could do. We could have line 45, instead of taking over that portion that today's 39 is doing, just instead have the 45 continue to go to Portland like what it's already been doing, and then tack on today's line 39 to the 51. That's very confusing. So basically, RIP line 39. Because line 51 will come out of downtown Portland, out of Goose Hollow, do the regular Vista Avenue thing through that, Portland Heights, then down Dosh Road, and then I would maybe change it so that it wouldn't be literally exactly the same route as the 55. You can just stay on Dosh Road, and you'll eventually end up at Beaverton-Hillsdale Highway, then go over to Ida B. Wells High School, and from there, take over all of line 39, and it would now be the 51. So the 51 would then go down Terwilliger, and then whatever the names of the streets are, I can't remember them off the top of my head, Stevenson and Huber and all that to the Barber Transit Center. That would be the 51. As far as the 53 by the Beaverton Transit Center, honestly, I'm okay with it because the 45 would provide kind of all-day service through this. It is a little bit more industrial kind of corporate environments, and so it's fine. And it doesn't go to Washington Square or Tigard Transit Center, but that's fine because line 42 exists and we'll be sort of doing some of those things. We're not losing any service here, it's just being combined. So the western portion of line 45 I'm fine with. It's the mess by Ida B. Wells High School that I have a problem with and think should be the 51 instead. So here's your summary. Line 39 would be slashed. Goodbye. Line 45 would go from downtown Portland to Beaverton Transit Center. It'd go downtown, Barber, Capitol Highway, and through the regular line 45 route all the way to Garden Home and Olson. And then it would just stay on Garden Home and go up to like 92nd Avenue or whatever it is, and the eastern portion of Allen Boulevard, and then it would just take all the same streets the 53 takes on Arctic and Western, Griffith Drive and all that back to the Beaverton Transit Center. The 51 I already explained, but it would go from downtown Portland to Ida B. Wells High School, and it would just stay on Dosh Road a bit longer than today's 55, all the way to Wells High School, and then it would continue all the way to Barber Transit Center. And then line 53 would be discontinued because the 45 would be serving stops through that area. There is one single downside to this, and it would absolutely suck, but it is something that you can solve pretty easily, and it is that line 51, you are gonna need to use 30-foot buses, whereas today's line 39 uses 40-foot buses, so you would lose out on some space, but that can be very easily solved by adding a second bus. And that's it. So probably the very first trip, so Ida B. Wells, I think they end at 3:30, and so there could be a trip at like 3:40 or maybe a little before. That would be the first 51, and the 51 would just go from Ida B. Wells to Barber Transit Center. It would just do one loop. And then scheduled only maybe 3-4 minutes behind it would be a 51 that does the whole route starting at Goose Hollow, and it would serve Ida B. Wells High at maybe 3:42 or something, or 3:43, 3:44, whatever. And so you could get on that. And so having two 30-foot buses would be fine. And then, of course, you've got Lincoln High School, which is taking the rest of line 51. So line 51 would kind of be doing double duty here. And then you would also have the school tripper that would actually do the Council Crest portion, and it would just be one morning trip and one evening trip. Ideally, it would also, and this would be weird, but ideally it would also run on Saturdays and Sundays to kind of provide service to Council Crest Park, because that would be nice, but I didn't write anything here in my script because I just never really finished my script, but let's talk about the next two bus lines, 12 and 54. The way they have this drawn on the map is weird, but again, because the Southwest Corridor light rail line will use Barber Boulevard, it means that line 12 won't have to use Barber and instead could use Capitol Highway and could go on the Beaverton-Hillsdale corridor to Beaverton Transit Center, taking over today's 54 entirely. I get what they were going after here, but at the same time, I sort of feel weird about it. The 12 and the 54 do have the same frequencies now, but I feel like the 12 is definitely a busier route, and I feel like moving the 12 onto Beaverton-Hillsdale Highway kinda creates a hole, and we shouldn't be creating holes. If instead the 12 remained alone and just stayed the same, but it went, Park Rose all the way down Sandy Boulevard onto Burnside into downtown Portland, it'd be the same. The start would be the same, and then it begins to go on Barber Boulevard, serves the Gibbs and Hamilton Street MAX stations. Well, there is a huge distance between the Hamilton Street station and the 13th Avenue station, and if the 12 were to go away here, there would be absolutely no service, including to a very important intersection, that being Barber and Terwilliger. Yeah, the 13th Avenue station is kind of close to that, but it'd be nice to have bus service retained on that portion of the corridor. So I would say having the 12 turning around at Burlingame makes more sense in my head. And so line 12 would basically be the same as today, but it would only go as far as Barber and Bertha, and then it would just turn around basically around the Burlingame Fred Meyer, and then it would just head back. And then line 54 would remain alone. You wouldn't change it at all. It would just go from Beaverton Transit Center to Portland on the Beaverton-Hillsdale Highway. There you go. Nice and simple. More routes. 36? You may think, this has already happened. Why are we even talking about this? This has already happened in Forward Together 1.0, except it's not 3536, but, I'm going to be talking about the West Lynn thing. I simply do not get this at all. Why does line 153 exist? Why is it numbered the 153? What happened here? Let me tell you what makes more sense in my head. I personally have always kind of disliked the whole 35R, 35T thing, where line 35 branches right in the middle, and they lettered the branches. This never used to be a problem until the Forward Together thing, where they began to branch these services, because the old line 43 went all the way through to downtown Portland on the Corbett corridor and served some of these areas, and now it's just weird. The 35R, 35T, I don't really get it. It's cool. It's cool that the Macadam corridor can branch and serve Terwilliger and the Lewis and Clark Law School, and it serves more destinations and things. I like that. I just don't agree with how they implemented it. It just feels weird calling it the 35T when a lot of those areas by Lewis and Clark and Terwilliger and Taylor's Ferry, it doesn't really scream Macadam line 35 in my head. It's just random. Well, no matter, I suppose, right? It goes to Lake Oswego Transit Center, and that's where the 153 begins. Wait a minute. Well, this gives me an idea. So, let me get this straight. A branched route and then a new route that goes from a convenient transfer point? Well, that sounds like a brand new bus line right there. Easy. Get rid of the branch and combine the 35T and the 153, and you get 36. I have no idea if I pointed to 36. That's where that number comes from. But I'm not done. Now I gotta talk about line 76. I still feel really weird about the whole 76 extension that goes hourly to Oregon City. It still feels like they just kind of tacked it on to some random line, but it's what they did. And I also find it weird that today's services, you really got to know what you're doing. If you live in a certain area and you're trying to get to another, you have to know. Line 76 comes from Tualatin and serves Willamette Falls Drive, and then goes to Oregon City Transit Center. But line 153 comes from the north to the south and does a loop through a neighborhood and doesn't do Willamette Falls Drive or connect to Oregon City. It just abruptly ends right in downtown West Lynn. Some of y'all might not like what I'm about to say, but I personally don't see the point in the 76's extension and doesn't really think it needs to happen at all. However, if you must, I think it makes more sense to just keep going on I-205 and just long haul it. Don't stop in West Linn, just keep going all the way to Oregon City. And then this new Line 36 would serve West Linn and Willamette Falls Drive to go all the way to Oregon City that way. So a more local stop version. And so both bus lines would be going into Oregon City. So now think about the Macadam corridor and just in general the north-south corridor. Line 35 could get you between downtown Portland, Lake Oswego, and Oregon City Transit Center. They would serve those, but they would get there different ways. Similar to how today's 76 and 78 both serve Beaverton Transit Center, Washington Square Transit Center, and Tigard Transit Center, even though they all get there using different roads. That's great. That increases coverage, and honestly, without the branch in the middle, makes it simpler to understand, at least if I put myself in the shoes of somebody who's looking at the Trimet map trying to go from one destination to another. Let's talk more about my Line 36. This would take over a little bit of what the old 99 used to do as well, kinda. It would be express along the Macadam corridor. It would serve all stops in downtown Portland. It would only begin in downtown Portland. And then the last, it would serve all local stops to 200 blocks southwest Harrison. Then it wouldn't serve any stops until Moody and Meade, where you could transfer to the South Waterfront bus lines and Tillicum and all that. And then Moody and Gibbs for the Portland Aerial Tram. And then Macadam and Nevada. That would be it. Maybe Macadam and Boundary, but I would suggest as the fewer the stops, the better. Then after that point, it would just serve all regular local stops along the route, covering all the 35T stops, and then basically line 153. But once you get to West Linn, it would go, you get into West Linn, and then it would go basically counterclockwise through West Linn, and then on Willamette Falls Drive all the way to Oregon City. Then if you're leaving Oregon City going the other way, it would just simply go the other way. It'd go down Willamette Falls Drive, and then it would go clockwise around the West Linn Loop and the Willamette thing, and then it would just go on Salamo Road. And then, to top it all off, what you could do is you could say during the rush hour, or maybe like during the evening time when Lewis and Clark students are probably going to be kind of more active out on the system, you could have extra buses that just go between downtown Portland and Lake Oswego on this Line 36. And so it would just be that. It would just go Portland, Lake Oswego, and then back, serving the Lewis and Clark Law School. And then on weekends, this bus line would only go between Portland and Lake Oswego Transit Center. It would not go through West Linn or Willamette. That would get service on weekdays only. I guess you could have some weekend service out to here somehow if you wanted to have the Willamette Falls Drive portion have service on the weekends. But I don't know if I would necessarily suggest that. I'm going to do a video maybe sometime before I turn 95 years old on an idea that I have that includes minimized service schedule things. And in there I included a West Linn shuttle. So maybe you could have like a West Linn shuttle that operates weekends only. And it just goes from Oregon City down Willamette Falls Drive and then turns around where today's 153 kind of turns around. And then that's it. That's the whole shuttle. And it would just operate weekends only through like the midday. But, just throwing random stuff out there. Maybe Willamette Shuttle is a better name. Whatever. To summarize, Line 35 would just be what today's 35R does. Goes University of Portland, or maybe St. John's. Maybe it should extend to St. John's. St. John's or University of Portland through the entire Greeley corridor over the Steel Bridge and then over into downtown Portland, and then the Macadam only corridor all the way through Lake Oswego and then back onto Macadam. Well, it's not called Macadam at that part, but whatever, and then over to Oregon City, and that'd be it. Line 36 would start at North Terminal, Union Station area in downtown Portland, go all the way through. It would go express through South Waterfront and on Macadam. Then it would go Taylor's Ferry, Terwilliger, serving the Lewis and Clark Law School, back onto Macadam, Lake Oswego, and then it would do the 153's route out of Lake Oswego, onto Highway 43 or whatever. Uh, just the whole Stafford and Salamo thing. Just entirely the same route. And then Blankenship, and then around to Willamette Falls Drive, and then stay on Willamette Falls Drive to I-205, and then go to Oregon City. That's the route. I'm going to need to make route maps of all these. That's going to take me a while, but the 76, like I said, would basically be the same as today's 76, and the hourly extension would just stay on I-205 the whole way. Just long haul it all the way. So the last stop, I can't remember the last stop off the top of my head. I'll put it here. The last stop of the 76, after this stop, the next stop would be Oregon City Transit Center. Let's talk about something simpler now, the 19 and the 25. Very simply, I don't know why they've split this up into two routes, but I do sort of get it at the same time as to not make the routes too unnecessarily long. But I would almost argue just making the whole corridor as line 19 would be fine. However, if you must keep it as two separate lines with the 19 and the 25, here's what you could do. And you could do this right now, like on the next sign up or the sign up after. You could make this very easy. And I'll talk about this more later. The routes could through run. So line 19 is going to take over today's 58 on Canyon Road and the Sunset Highway to downtown Portland, and it will do all of Gleason Road all the way to Gateway Transit Center, today's existing 19. The Woodstock portion would be an extension of line 4. That is stuff we've known for a while now. But then when it gets to Gateway Transit Center, then you could have the bus switch to a line 25 and continue from Gateway Transit Center over to Mount Hood Community College on Cherry Park and Troutdale Road. I think that works, and I think that makes sense. And what you could do is, if you wanted to give the operators a break at Gateway, you absolutely could. So you could have the 19 come in, go all the way to Gateway Transit Center, and lay over for 5 or 10 minutes, turn into a 25, and do the rest of the route off to Mount Hood Community College. Then you'd get a really long break probably at Mount Hood Community College because you have just driven all the way from Beaverton. So you'd get a long break out there, probably, if you could do it this way, probably like up to 30 minutes because the line runs at 30-minute frequency, and so you could get there right as soon as one other one is leaving, get the maximum break time you could. Anyway, it doesn't matter. You'd get that long time out there. You'd drive the 25 back to Gateway, get another 5 or 10 minute rest, and then you'd continue as a 19 off to Beaverton. And so they would through run all day. You could do this now if you wanted to. And the thing is, it makes so much sense in my head. Both lines run at the same frequency. They both run every 30 minutes, 7 days a week, right now. And to my knowledge, I'm going to have to look at the map again with the color codes, but I don't believe the frequency is going to change any. And so through running makes sense. Or having the whole corridor as line 19 also makes sense. And you can still have it lay over at Gateway for a few minutes, even if it were just the 19 the whole time. Time to talk about more my hometown, and that would be Hillsboro. And that is Century Boulevard. For those that don't know, Century Boulevard right now goes and goes and goes, and then it just ends at Noble Woods Park. You can drive around it, and then it begins again at Baseline, which is where line 47 today currently goes up and does all that. Okay, we have been awaiting the construction of the Century Boulevard overpass thing and extension for years now, and it seems like it's supposed to happen this year. A lot of construction is supposed to go all the way through, and that way you can just stay on Century from end to end. I don't know if Trimet is waiting for that to be completely done first before introducing some of these routes, but I feel as though I should probably talk about that. In the event that this doesn't happen and that Century Boulevard, we still have to wait several years before that's a thing, you can still introduce a bus line on Century. But you'll have to probably do some detour, just like how today's line 78 is currently detouring because the Hall Boulevard bridge over Highway 217 is under construction, and so it's going down Greenberg, but it's going kind of express through Greenberg and not really serving stops through there. It would be sort of like that. So buses coming from the south going north on Century Boulevard would be able to go as far north as Borwick Street. Then you just continue down Borwick Street all the way to Main, and then you just go down Main to go onto Century and you can continue north. There wouldn't be any stops on Borwick or Main. There'd probably be a stop at like Century and Borwick, and then it would just kind of detour and go kind of express in the meantime until the Century overpass thing is constructed, where it could then go all the way through and shave off at least a minute of the schedule. Now I'd like to talk about something I find kind of weird. Evergreen Parkway. It's kind of a mess. There's not really one bus line that just goes down the length of Evergreen, so it's a little weird. So you've got line 46, which will continue doing what it kind of does, going up Glencoe and then down Evergreen, but it won't serve Intel anymore, and instead would go down Brookwood and kind of through those areas. I think it could go down Brookwood, serve the Brookwood Library, and then go down Airport Road, but instead of going down Chute Road, Ride Connection already serves Chute Road, you could go down 49th, right in front of the Costco that's out here, then down Cornell and do the rest of what they want to do for the 46, which is Elam Young, 53rd, Main, and then Brookwood. The reason they're doing it like that is so that it serves more homes. It serves sort of the Hidden Creek area of Hillsboro, which is sort of a newly developed area. And if it were to stay on Brookwood Parkway, you wouldn't be able to serve a MAX station like this one serves Hawthorne Farm MAX station. It would only serve a few homes in a lesser density rather than the more industrial Hawthorne Farm area. And it just makes a little more sense to do it this way, even if it might add a couple of minutes to the schedule. I'll talk about line 64 here in a minute, but the 65, they want it to come up Century, and then they just kind of want it to take over the Ride Connection thing, so it won't go on Evergreen until Star Boulevard, which is west of Brookwood. And then it would kind of go and serve, it would basically be the Intel bus, because it would start at Intel Aloha and then go all the way up Century, serving Ronler, the Orenco station and Ronler, and then kind of going over Evergreen, and so they and then it would serve Jones Farm and then end at the fairgrounds. So it's kind of an N-shaped route. Well, maybe an N with the bottom of one of its legs cut off, but you know what I mean. So with all that in mind, then you have the 64, which they show on the map as just basically following the 65 through some of these areas and then just kind of turning around, doing this little loop, this little square at the very end. And to me, that seems like really wasted potential. It just kind of abruptly ends. What makes more sense in my head is there's this little chunk just south of it that's Evergreen that has no bus service. And so I would just have it stay on Evergreen, go north onto Brookwood, and then I'm just going to have to probably show this on a map what I'm talking about. But Ride Connection goes on Helvetia Road and then down to Pine Farm Court or Place or whatever. You could just have it turn around there. And there you go. That's where line 64 would turn around. It serves a little bit more of the Brookwood corridor. It provides different service from the 65 or 66. I get the 65 and 66 mixed up. Wow, so all those times that I said 65 earlier, I probably put a little 66 with a star over my mouth. I don't know why, but I always get the 65 and 66 mixed up, even though there's a science behind it. 64 is going to come up 198th. The 65 is Cornelius Pass. 66 is Century. It gradually goes, the numbers go up. Whatever. They probably should have done that the other way, though, because the 67 comes up 158th, so it probably should be 64, 65, 66, 67, but whatever. Let's not get into that. Speaking of the 65, Cornelius Pass, that one I have two thoughts about. Number one, when it goes to the Kotama Max station, what they want it to do is they want it to go down baseline and interline with the line 47. And then it would come up 205th or 206th or whatever and go to the Kotama Park and Ride, and then down Wilkins and back onto Cornelius Pass. I don't fully agree with that. Yes, it absolutely should serve the Max station, but why serve the baseline corridor when there's Kotama Street or Kotama Road or whatever north of there that wouldn't get any service, even though it's kind of separate from the baseline corridor because of how the forest and the creeks and all that kind of divide everything up. Not to mention the fact that there's a mobile home park right off of Kotama Road. The only reason I know that is because there was a period of time where we were looking for a house out there. It's really close to there, and seems to me like it would make sense to have this new Line 65 serving Kotama Road. So you'd have the 47 on baseline, and then you'd have the 65 on Kotama Road. Having it come back on Wilkins and back on to Cornelius Pass is perfectly fine. The only other thought I have is when it gets to Liberty High School area, and you go to Cornelius Pass, Wagon, and then there's that Crony Way or whatever, that kind of is the ride connection corridor to Westmark Center. Instead of it just kind of ending there or turning around there, it could follow the ride connection corridor down Jacobson and interline with Line 64 at that Pine Farm Court thing that I was talking about earlier. And so both the 64 and 65 would serve this particular corridor. And it means that so long as the services run at the same frequency, they could actually through run. I'll talk about through running later. The number's gone. I'd like to talk about something. When I wrote this script, I must have just kind of put things wherever because there's more lines that I'm going to talk about after this, but I'm doing it in order so I don't forget anything. I'm now going to talk about vehicle length. Trimet needs more articulated buses. Don't just get articulated buses for the FX corridors. There are plenty of other bus lines that need articulated buses and have needed them for decades and had them decades ago, and then Trimet had one bad experience with the Crown Icarus buses and hasn't ordered any since, except for the Nova buses, which are not my favorite. For the FX project, we need more. We need good buses. We need, well, if I were in charge of purchasing them, I'd get hybrid buses because we know their performance is at least fairly decent. You could do half and half, like New Flyer's XDE60s, personal favorite of mine, and then some New Flyer XE60s if you want to check out the electric articulated buses. But there's more. There seems to be a lot of wasted potential with other routes, because there's a missing size that Trimet hasn't had since the 300 series buses were a thing, and that is 35 foot. Trimet doesn't have any 35-foot buses, and you may be thinking, well, that seems kind of pointless. Now, I don't actually remember if I've made this video or if I was going to make this video and never got around to it, but there is a certain science behind vehicle length, and I'm not going to get into it too much here, but the 30-foot buses are perfect for the really low ridership routes and for routes that have very tight corners that are otherwise hard to maneuver. Then you have 35-foot buses, which in my opinion are perfect for the lower ridership routes. They have light passenger loads, not necessarily any tight corners or anything, just lighter passenger loads. And that way you're not using a 40-foot bus, which is expensive to refuel, that you're running on mostly empty. I think it would save you money. Line 72 time. There are a few things that I don't understand. So the current FX line on Division is numbered, FX2, because it took over line 2. And so the FX project on 82nd and on TV Highway on this map just simply say FX. They don't have a number or anything. But okay, fine, I guess we just assume they're going to reuse the existing numbers. But then, look at Killingsworth on this map. It's still line 72. So what, we're going to have an FX 72 and a regular line 72? That doesn't make any sense. Oh, well, maybe the FX line will be FX3 or something. But then, number one, what happened to number one? There is no FX1. And not to mention, to me, there's no logic in that at all. If you wanted to renumber the FX line to a different line and then say Killingsworth will just remain as 72, I get that line of thinking, but it is not, in my opinion, the most good use of that. What is the busiest portion of today's line 72? Is it 82nd Avenue or is it Killingsworth? I'll give you a hint. It's 82nd. 82nd Avenue is the busiest. Just look at the proof from the schedules from 4, 5, 6 years ago where they plastered a bunch of trips that only did 82nd Avenue. They went Clackamas Town Center to Killingsworth and Cully, or 72nd or whatever. That's all they did. And they would sprinkle these in so it was insanely frequent because the 82nd Avenue corridor was the busiest. Therefore, more people know of line 72 for 82nd Avenue rather than for Killingsworth. And so keeping the FX number as FX72 makes more sense. And then Killingsworth, sorry, that's going to have to be its own line now. You could choose pretty much anything. You could choose a number in the 20s and say like you wanted to reuse, I don't know, 21 or something, but I wouldn't suggest that. Because it goes through North Portland and because it's a major route and one of the first ones you would see on the list, I would say line 3, Killingsworth. That's fine. I would not suggest using the number 5 because lots of times line 5 and I-5 could be sort of confused and it's like, oh, does this route go on I-5 or anything? Or Interstate Avenue used to be line 5. And I would suggest kind of steering clear from the number 5 for now. And let's go with 3, Killingsworth. And it would run every 12 minutes or whatever as today's is because it's been promised that today's, after the FX line opens on 82nd Avenue, the Killingsworth portion, which would be a different bus line, would retain the same frequency as it does today. It's been said before, so I'd like to see that stay. Let's talk about just some general FX thoughts. I talked about some from part 1, but the question has come up before of, well, why not just build these as streetcar corridors? Like Division could have been a streetcar. 82nd could definitely be a streetcar. TV Highway could be a streetcar. Why don't we build them as streetcars? These corridors are already very busy and already very full of traffic. Cars, pedestrians, buses, bikes. Well, maybe not bikes because nobody would dare bike on these corridors, but it's got a lot going on. And adding a streetcar here just doesn't seem like the right fit. Not to mention the fact that, look at these on a map. Division Street connects with downtown Portland. 82nd's way over here. TV Highway's way over here. They're all disconnected. You would have to build individual yards for all of these projects. That's not good. Don't get me wrong. I like streetcars, and when they're done right, they are amazing. And I really wish we would have retained our old streetcar systems from the early 1900s. But we have to work with what we have to work with. And streetcar corridors on stroads, not a good idea. We need to be smart about what is going to be our FX corridor, what is going to be a streetcar corridor, and if the corridor is just busy and busy and busy beyond belief and we need some sort of express train, then max corridor. And that brings up another point with 82nd Avenue, is it's only about 10 to 15 blocks away from the Max Green Line, and so having a high-capacity rail line is great, but we already have that. Time to talk about Line 49. So the 46 runs through North Hillsborough, the 47 is kind of Central Hillsborough, the 48 is also kind of North Hillsborough, and then the 49 is Columbia Boulevard. What? Okay. Maybe it relates to something. No, 51 goes Vista Avenue. 52 goes through Beaverton. The 54 Beaverton. 55 is Raleigh Hills, Portland. 49. Where did that number come from? Why choose 49? So, my idea is to scribble out 49 and replace it with another kind of low number because it relates to line 11 a little bit, but everything around the number 11 is pretty much already taken, and so the next available number would be 13. But 13 wouldn't be used, probably because of superstition, and because the Max Red Line shuttle uses block numbers in the 1300s. So, okay, fine. So let's instead say that let's go down and say 7, line 7. Now, 7 is already kind of used by extra blocks, but those could be reused into the 500s if we assume that those are never going to be used in general, and so it would be line 7, Columbia Boulevard. I just happened to think of this. I didn't even write this on the script or anything. Let's talk about line 27. Yes, 27. Now, they were messing with this on Forward Together 1.0, and I've come up with it, but I can't really come up with a good name for it without sounding way too redundant with line 20. The route would not begin in downtown Portland. It could, and then go over Tillicum Crossing. But the main idea here is that it would go up Water Avenue all the way to Stark Street, providing some local service on the east, very close to the river on the east side, which doesn't really have that great of services. You have MLK and Grand, which are kind of faster moving traffic, and then everything west of that is kind of forgotten about, so I like that. And then it would go down Stark Street, and then it would take over today's line 15 going all the way through here and all of that. And then it would just, after Gateway area, it would instead go down Market, Mill, Main, all the M's basically, through the areas. It's south of line 20 through here, and it just kind of fills in a little gap, which is cool to see. I would then combine that with the East Burnside segment, which is why I'm having a hard time coming up with a name for this, because Stark and Burnside does not work because line 20 is Burnside Stark. But anyway, it would do all of Burnside where the areas are basically after the Max leaves Burnside Street. That whole corridor, the rest of the way through Gresham and East, there's no bus service on at all, which is crazy. And so you could easily do that and then have it turn around using Pleasanton Street or whatever the name is of that street. Let me double check. I don't live out this way. I'm not familiar with the street names. It would go all the way through like the Powell Valley area and turn around on Palmquist Road and then go up Hood Avenue or whatever to the Gresham Transit Center. I'm thinking of them all now. This one still doesn't make any sense in my head. And that is lines 6, 10, and 14. What do all three of these have in common? They all cross the Hawthorne Bridge. That's great. However, what they want to do in Forward Together makes no sense in my mind. They want to leave line 10 alone to where it turns around at the City Hall. And then they want to flip-flop where the 6 and the 14 go. So that line 14 would instead go to Goose Hollow and line 6 would turn around at the City Hall. To me, I still don't understand why they did that. Instead, you have 3 different bus lines, 6, 10, 14. Why not have 3 different destinations? Line 6 could continue doing what it already has been doing so that there's no confusion, goes all the way to Goose Hollow and turns around. Line 10 would continue to turn around at City Hall just like it currently does. And line 14, well, it would go onto the Transit Mall and go all the way to North Terminal. And it would probably serve the FX stops, I imagine, because before FX2 opened and the old Line 2 was running on Division Street, it used to go over the Hawthorne Bridge. And then we lost that service in 2022 because FX crosses Tillicum now. And so there's no way to go from a 1-seat ride on the Transit Mall over the Hawthorne Bridge. And so that's why I'm doing that here. Line 14 is frequent service. And so it just kind of makes sense having it the most frequent corridor going through here. Line 6 is frequent service as well, but having it go up the Transit Mall would create the route in sort of a U shape. And Portland Streetcar also operates on MLK and Grand and is already very circulator-like, and so I just feel that that's not the right fit. Line 14 should use the Transit Mall to North Terminal. This video is going on too long. That is a lot of numbers, but let's go over it quickly. Line 28. I would need to look at this map again, but I have it figured in my head of how I would have these go. So line 28 would come out of Milwaukee and onto the McLaughlin corridor, even after the Max Orange line opens. And then it would go down Rothy, which I'm actually pronouncing right because I've now got that memorized. Down Rothy, up Oatfield Road, and then down Thesian Road, which I'm actually not sure if I'm pronouncing that right now. But anyway, it would go Thesian Road. Then it would take a left onto Johnson, and then onto, very briefly, the Milwaukee Expressway, and then go up the 82nd corridor all the way to Clackamas Town Center. Line 29 would just simply be renamed to Lake Road because the route would be a little different. It comes out of Milwaukee, and it goes on to Lake Road. And that's it. It just stays on Lake Road all the way up until the Milwaukee Expressway, and then it would stay on the Milwaukee Expressway all the way through to Clackamas Town Center. Now, to be clear, I believe there's a bridge or something over Milwaukee Expressway. That's not the one I'm talking about. I'm talking about a surface intersection where it kind of curves in, and you can either go straight or you can go left onto the Milwaukee Expressway. It would be that, and it would do that all the way up 82nd Drive to Clackamas Town Center. Line 30's route would remain the same, but the 30E would also use the Milwaukee Expressway, but it would exclusively use the Milwaukee Expressway. It would serve all the way up to 82nd and then onto the Milwaukee Expressway, and it would stay on there until Milwaukee City Center, and that would be it. That's the 30E. Probably 1 or 2 morning trips that would go to Milwaukee, and then 2 evening trips that would go to Estacada. Before I get into the other routes, let's talk about Clackamas Community College. There are 3 different ways to get there from Oregon City. There is what today's McLaughlin corridor uses, the 33. It kind of goes between the McLaughlin corridor and through some neighborhoods, and then eventually ends up on that Warner Milne or whatever, and goes there that way. A fairly quick way, but it serves a lot of important businesses and at frequent rate. Then you've got the way the 32 does it, which is the long way of doing it, where it drives more through Oregon City neighborhoods, serving the old Oregon City High School and some other stadium and a hospital complex before going down Malala Road and then continuing through Beaver Creek and going basically the back way around the modern Oregon City High School and then to Clackamas Community College. And then there's the way that the 99 used to do it, and that is to go out of Oregon City Transit Center down 7th Street, and that kind of wraps around and ends up on Malala, which you can just stay on and is a much more straight shot to get to CCC. So with that in mind, I'm now going to talk about lines 31, 32, and 79 kind of at the same time. So line 31 would be Webster Road, and this would come out of Clackamas Town Center and then down 82nd, onto the Milwaukee Expressway, and then onto Webster. And it would just stay on Webster the entire length of this road until Oatfield Road. It would then go down Oatfield Road, interlining with the 32 until Jennings. It would then go down Jennings all the way to McLaughlin, and then it would take McLaughlin all the way to Oregon City. The 31 would then take the quick route between Oregon City and CCC. The quick route is, again, out of Oregon City. It basically ends up on 7th, which ends up onto Malala Avenue, and it just stays on there all the way to CCC. That's it. This would be the quicker route. Less frequent, but it is the one there. Line 32, Oatfield Road. This route doesn't really change too much. Comes out of Milwaukee onto Oatfield Road. It stays on Oatfield Road and does not go through Gladstone. This route does not go through Gladstone. Well, it kind of does. It goes on the outer edge on Oatfield Road. And then it would jump onto I-205 for about 7 milliseconds and go to the Trails End Highway and then through Washington, basically what today's 79 does, and it would serve the Amtrak station. It's more of a straight shot, which is why they're doing it. It's a straight shot all the way through 82nd and then through the industrial corridor of Washington in Oregon City, and then it would end up at Oregon City Transit Center. Then this would take the long way to get to CCC, the back way, which is basically like it would be today, except I would almost suggest it going all the way down 12th Street, because you can go down 12th Street all the way through and then go up Jackson and around, and instead of 16th, do 15th. So it would go 12th, Jackson, 15th, before basically doing what today's 32 does, going on Malala and then Beaver Creek Road and kind of circling around Oregon City High School and going around that way. And in my mind, line 33 doesn't exist, McLaughlin doesn't get its own dedicated bus, it would be an extension of the Max Orange line, and so then you've got line 79, which would do what it does today, comes out of Clackamas Town Center and just stays on 82nd Drive all the way through, and then once it gets to Gladstone, it would go down Dartmouth Street all the way through Gladstone, onto the McLaughlin corridor, and then to Oregon City Transit Center. But after the Oregon City Transit Center, because there is a potential for this route to run every 15 minutes at some point, it would then be the corridor that goes a little bit more onto McLaughlin and then through High Street and through the southern area of Oregon City and serving like the post office and all that on the Warner-Milne corridor. So it would be sort of the quick-ish way, but the destination-filled way of getting to there. So in short, line 31 would take over what the old 99 did. The 32 would continue doing what it does, but a slightly shorter route through Oregon City, as it's not nearly as wild if you look at it on a map. And then the 79 would take over what today's 33 does, all between Oregon City and CCC. Now I'd like to talk about through running. Through running is when a bus, you start as a bus operator on one line, and then you go to a certain point and you change into another route and you do that one. Sort of like the 43 and the 56. They go into OHSU and then they'll swap routes up in OHSU and go as the other route. There's a lot of different areas where this could be the case. I'll black out the screen and let you look at that now. So the 7 is the Columbia Boulevard corridor. 19 and 25 I already talked about. 29 and 30 are going to be similar schedules, and so their blocks could definitely interline. Of course, the 30E trips would probably just be their own single trips. You have a choice for the 31 and the 79. You could have them switch either at CCC or Clackamas Town Center. I would personally pick Clackamas Town Center because the buses pull into a parking garage and you have a nice kind of layover there, so you can take a long break, and that way it's not too confusing where it's like, okay, I'm going to wait for the 79, but the bus comes in and it says 31, and then at the last second it switches to a 79, and it's like, well, now what route am I on? Adding confusion. I'm all about getting rid of the confusion. And again, the 52 and 54 there at the end, they would have the same frequency. They're both running at every 15 minutes, so a 54 coming in from Beaverton-Hillsdale Highway would go to BTC, and then it could turn into a 52 out of Beaverton Transit Center. Farmington Road is the continuation of Beaverton-Hillsdale Highway, so it all kind of makes sense. Now, I'd like to talk about transit centers. I've made an entire video on this before, but I've kind of changed some of my opinions, but I definitely think Milwaukee Transit Center needs to come back. A St. John's Transit Center should probably exist, even if it's just a simple sidewalk transit center. It would be kind of nice to have. That way it just looks nice. It looks nice having an actual transit center. It looks good on your maps. It looks good in your stats. So it's good. You don't want to overdo it with transit centers, but I think St. John's could definitely use one. And then one that I used to think was kind of but now that we're having so many lines that are going to be going through this corridor, and while there's space for it, one at Powell and Highland. Maybe you could call this the Centennial Transit Center, as I've looked at some of the nearby names of some of the businesses, and that seems to be kind of a common name, so I guess that works. And last but not least, Rose City Express. That's the name of my bus company that would take over all of the interstate highway routes and go point-to-point destinations on all of these different routes. It would basically be the Sound Transit of the Portland region. And it is a lot. I have gone way overboard, and I've slimmed these lists down. So, yeah. I don't remember if I've done a video on this specifically, or if it was just the express routes. If I haven't, I'm going to have to do one. But I have a lot of routes that are all point-to-point destinations. A lot of them originate in downtown Portland, but some of them don't. I've got groups that originate out of Beaverton Transit Center, Clackamas Town Center, and Gateway Transit Center, and Portland Airport. So lots of different little areas here. Now let's talk about the MAX. Southwest Corridor is needed now. It's needed immediately. Where is the funding sources for this? We need to revive this project immediately. Line 12 is so insanely busy. We need something. And an FX line ain't gonna cut it because the buses are still gonna be crowded. The buses are still probably gonna have to stop at the streets, and the Southwest Corridor rail alignment weaves a little bit more than just a bus on Barber Boulevard. It's more high capacity, there's less stations, it's just better. And if you're gonna sit here and think, oh, well, it's gonna bring crime to my neighborhood, well, sorry, but crime is everywhere. The moment you step outside your front door, you could maybe be stabbed or something. But if you spend your whole life thinking that, you're never going to get anything done. Public transit with large light rail vehicles going down the main corridors of your street is a very logical solution It's not going to bring any more crime than the 12 would already bring. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. Who knows? But the Max Orange line, people were saying the same thing. Oh, the crime train through Milwaukee, and yet we don't hear about big drug busts and big gangs and all this that are all over the place in Milwaukee now suddenly because the Orange line opened. That didn't happen. So if that's the big hang up here, can I just say politely, please grow up. We need this line. We've needed the line forever. And if you're scared that it's not going to be a successful line because the Orange line wasn't successful and so we're just, I guess, not good at building projects anymore, I doubt it. We see how busy line 12 is. I'm telling you, go into Portland at, I don't know, 10:30 a.m. on a weekday where the 12 should be dead, and it's not. They're just not. They're busy. And it's just insane to me. We need this project done, and we need it done now. We will cry like a baby until it gets done. And in the meantime, can we just get a big-time frequency boost on line 12, at least during the rush hour? If we could get, a regular line 12 bus, and then a 12E that serves less stops so people get home quicker, and then maybe another 12 and 12E, sprinkle it to where there's trips every 5 minutes, that would be amazing. So there'd be like a local trip, and then an express trip, and then 2 local trips, an express trip, 2 local trips, an express, every 5 minutes like that during the rush. That would be amazing until the Southwest Corridor project is done. That way it would relieve crowding, and it would get into people's heads that, oh, I can take transit on this corridor. There's more buses now. There's more room for me. And, you'll see more buses going by on the Barber Corridor anyways, and it would get locked into your head of, wow, there's a lot of buses down here. Maybe I should try this. Now it's time to talk about the big dig. We're not going to be doing the same big dig that Boston did a very long time ago, and that felt very weird saying that. But this would sort of be similar, but not really. Let me explain. Tracks could be dug under I-5. On the east side of the Willamette River, tracks under I-5. And it would serve, I guess, less stations. It would be so much quicker. And it would open up Interstate Avenue, which already has street-level tracks on it, to be a very good streetcar corridor. You don't need to use 2-car trains on this particular corridor, but you could. The platforms absolutely are long enough to support it. Why not? And it would mean there'd be no interlining with the MAX. So Green Line trains would actually still end at PSU. Yellow Line trains would go from downtown Vancouver and Evergreen, Evergreen Boulevard, all the way to Tualatin, the Southwest Corridor line, and then the Orange Line would go from Milwaukee, and they would interline with the yellow, but it would be the yellow and orange running side by side, and then the Orange Line would go out west so it would serve the same state. It would serve the same stations there at Delta Park, Expo Center, Hayden Island, and maybe downtown Vancouver, and then the tracks would swing out west and would go to the Vancouver Amtrak station, and they would end there. And that way there would be more of a mix of destinations that the trains would connect to. And it would be faster, which would definitely make it faster to take that train and go into downtown Portland. Think about it. Right now, if the interstate bridge replacement thing were all done and you lived in Vancouver but worked in Portland, which a lot of people do, you hop on the MAX somewhere in Vancouver, you still got to ride through Interstate Avenue, which is very slow, only 30 miles an hour, rather than the I-5 corridor, which would be much faster. Much worse land use, because land use around interstate highways isn't particularly good, but definitely a speed increase big time. And you'd still have the streetcar tracks to be used on Interstate Avenue if you needed that corridor, which I definitely recognize as a busy corridor. The old Line 5, Interstate Avenue, used articulated buses, so I get it. I'm going to hammer this point home too. Why is the tunnel not being built? Why are we not building a tunnel under downtown Portland? This is something we needed in 1986, we need it now, and we're going to need it in 2045. We need to design a tunnel. The city of Portland or something is going to have to get together and speed this along. Don't rush the project too much to where you're making stupid mistakes, but we really need this. If we had a tunnel that went from Goose Hollow through downtown, you could have branches. You could do this smart. Because if you go from Goose Hollow how they want to do it, Goose Hollow, Jefferson, the Transit Mall, and then over to the east side under the Willamette River, and then under, say, Multnomah Street to the Lloyd District, that's great. Do that. But you are going to lose that Providence Park Max station, which is going to suck. Because, you know, if you take full advantage of this and build the platforms long enough to accommodate 4-car trains, and then somehow figure out what to do with stations like Sunset Transit Center and Washington Park to accommodate those larger trains, let's say you do that, at least build it long enough for that anyways. It would be a real waste to build trains that are that, you know, high capacity and stations that are larger, and then not build it to a stadium, Providence Park, that has major, massive events happen at it. It makes a lot of sense. So you could branch it, and you could have the tracks going under Jefferson and then up the Transit Mall, and then you could basically make a little square, and from Goose Hollow have it go under 18th and then under Morrison or something, all the way to Pioneer Square, and then join back in with the Blue Lines tracks or the Red Lines tracks or whatever onto the Transit Mall. And so you'd have, say, Blue Line trains going Goose Hollow, and then a station maybe by City Hall area, and then Pioneer Square, and then Union Station, and then the Red Lines would serve the Goose Hollow, Providence Park, and then Pioneer Square, where they join back in with the other trains, and then Union Station, and going, you know, I've talked about this before, just basically having it branched so you'd actually be able to serve all the destinations. We need to design this, and if we do it all at once, it's gonna suck, but if you do it all at once, it's going to help so much once it's done. We're going to forget about all the times that downtown was under construction and, oh no, detours. Once it's done, it's there, and it's going to be there forever, and it's going to help so much. Build it. Can you believe how fast the Seattle Link train travels through downtown? And those stops are fairly close together, maybe around 6 blocks apart or so. And yet, it's able to go 30, 35, 40 miles an hour because the trains are long, the station platforms are long, and it's underground. There's no obstacles. Every single time I'm in downtown Portland and I hear that there's a parade going on or some run, like the Shamrock Run or something, that's going to block the tracks, and you sit there and you just watch the train sitting there waiting for there to be a gap in the parade so that they can let a train through, it's like, this is unnecessary. If the trains were underground, this wouldn't be a problem. The tree lighting. You wouldn't have to close the Pioneer Square station because of how many people are at Pioneer Square for the tree lighting in November. You can just, I don't know, maybe it would still be a good idea to kind of close that area and to kind of funnel people a certain way out of there. That way they're not blocking any entrances, because that can be a fire hazard. But, you know, just be smart with it. You do not have to overdo this. I'm not kidding when I say I would be perfectly fine with a New York subway style station entrance where it's literally just a staircase on the sidewalk, and you just go down, and then it just goes right there. Obviously you're going to need an elevator too, and you're probably going to need to lock these off because people are stupid and will vandalize things, but, you know, that's beside the point. So my point is, build the tunnel and be smart with it. Now, I would talk about streetcars future as well, but I haven't really put too much thought on that recently yet, so I'm going to leave that out for now. And I think everything that I've wanted to say, I have said. So I want to thank you for watching this never-ending series, and I'll see you next time with another video.